One bad trade can wreck a team for years. Just ask the Browns when they traded a boatload of draft picks for a quarterback who was facing over 20 sexual assault allegations. But before we get to Cleveland, for what was very likely the worst trade in NFL history, some other deals put up a battle for that title. So let's kick things off in Chicago, where the Bears traded up to take Mitchell Trubisky. In 2017, the Chicago Bears were searching for a franchise quarterback. Not wanting to get jumped for their guy, Chicago sent San Francisco 2/3 and a 4th, swapping first just to move up one spot in the first round. The Bears took Mitchell Trubisky out of North Carolina with the 2nd pick. Trubisky played early in his rookie year but failed to impress. He played better in 2018, but his turnovers remained an issue, tossing 12 picks and losing 6 fumbles. Chicago made the playoffs in 2019, but it was largely on the back of a dominant defense. Super Bowl MVP Nick Foles was brought in 2020 to challenge Trubisky for the starting job, but Mitch remained the starter for most of the season until he got banged up. Trubisky was allowed to walk in free agency in 2021, which is not the result you'd want from a first-round quarterback, especially one you traded up for. Tell me, was Trubisky the problem, or was Chicago at fault for not developing the young quarterback? What could have been, we'd never know, but Patrick Mahomes was still on the board when the Bears took Trubisky. Imagine Mahomes in the Windy City. That would have been cold. Meanwhile, the 49ers, on the other hand, didn't do well with the trade either. Instead of taking Patrick Mahomes to pair with Kyle Shanahan, general manager John Lynch drafted Stanford's defensive end Solomon Thomas. Unfortunately, the Niners have lost multiple Super Bowls to Mahomes, and Thomas didn't meet expectations. That will forever be a thorn in the side of San Francisco's front office. However, it wasn't all misery. The extra 3rd rounder they got from the Bears resulted in BYU linebacker Fred Warner, a consensus All-Pro linebacker who's been the heart and soul of their defense. Talking about misery, no one has experienced more of it than Browns fans, except this time they were helped out of their mistake. The Colts saved the Browns from Trent Richardson. The 2012 draft class was loaded with talent. Alabama running back Trent Richardson was one of the standout prospects, with many NFL teams drooling over his college resume. Just watching his highlights from his time with the Tide, you couldn't blame anyone for drafting him high. In his final year with Alabama, Richardson totaled over 1,700 rushing yards and 21 touchdowns. When draft day came, the Browns traded up one spot with the Vikings, trading their 4th, 5th, and 7th round picks that year to secure the Alabama running back. Trent Richardson nearly missed the beginning of his rookie season with the knee injury, but managed to play 15 games and wasn't bad, really. He rushed for 950 yards and 11 touchdowns. Plus, he caught 51 passes for 367 receiving yards and a touchdown, all on the 5-11 Browns. Expectations were set high for Richardson to be the franchise player, like an old Cleveland legend Jim Brown himself, but those hopes were short-lived, as just 2 games into his 2nd season, the Colts, in desperate need of a running back, traded a first-round pick for Richardson, which paired him with Andrew Luck in Indianapolis in hopes of making a strong playoff run. Richardson was mediocre with the Colts in 2013, losing the starting job at multiple points that season, and in 2014 before being cut for skipping practice without alerting the team in 2015. Truly a poor return on investment for both teams. It didn't take long for the Browns to return to misery, though, as they used the Colts' first-rounder in 2014 to trade up for Johnny Manziel. But believe it or not, that trade didn't make this list, comparing it to these other deals. Like when the Raiders traded Davante Adams for cheap. Is it just me, or are the Raiders playing a little deja vu? Y'all remember when the Raiders had a pretty good receiver, but then traded him away to the Patriots? Yeah, Randy Moss went on to catch 23 touchdowns in his very first year in New England. The Raiders got a 3rd-round pick in return for Moss, but when they originally acquired him from the Vikings, they gave up former first-round linebacker Napoleon Harris and a first-round pick in 2005. Fast forward to the initial Davante Adams trade. When the Raiders acquired Adams from Green Bay, they gave the Packers 1st and 2nd-round picks. At the time, it was worth it. The Raiders had Derek Carr, and Raider Nation was given a boatload of hope that their silver and black were contenders, but they had Josh McDaniels as their head coach, and everything went to poop. Adams put up all-pro numbers with Carr, but McDaniels released Carr after one season and replaced him with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brian Hoyer. Eventually, the Raiders replaced McDaniels with Antonio Pierce, who Davante vouched for in the hiring process. But during AP's first season as the official head coach, he appeared to have beef with number 17, liking a post on Instagram that said Adams may have played his last snap with the Raiders. The relationship between AP and Adams got sour fast, so the Raiders traded the All-Pro receiver away to the Jets in Week 7 of the 2024 season, and in return only got a conditional third-round pick. Unlike the distracting Randy Moss, many of Davante's Raider teammates came to his defense and stated he was no distraction in the locker room. All Davante wanted was to help his childhood team return to glory, but lousy coaching and offensive scheming hindered him from contributing to the standard of excellence he expected of himself. It's a shame that the leadership in Vegas had no clue how to use a player who wanted to be a pillar of the franchise.
What's going on?
Just trying to figure out why we can't have nice things.
The next worst deal was the Titans trading A.J. Brown to the Eagles for Treylon Burks. In 2021, the Tennessee Titans were fresh off being the #1 seed in the AFC, marking their third consecutive playoff appearance under head coach Mike Vrabel. Despite the success, they refused to sign their superstar receiver A.J. Brown to a top market contract extension and traded him on draft night to the Philadelphia Eagles. In return, the Titans got the Eagles' first and third round picks, which is pretty good return, but they really only ended up with Treylon Burks. Meanwhile, the Eagles were happy to pay their new star receiver A.J. Brown, giving him a new contract and re-upping again in 2024. The former Titan has balled out for the Eagles, putting up bigger numbers, aiding in Jalen Hurts' development, and was the top offensive weapon in Philly's 2022 Super Bowl run. The Eagles totally won the deal, but back when Chip Kelly was coaching the team, they experienced being on the other side. Philly's Chip Kelly traded LeSean McCoy to the Bills for Kiko Alonso. In 2014, LeSean "Shady" McCoy became the all-time leading rusher in Philly with 6,792 yards in just 6 seasons. He was an elusive runner and a core piece for the franchise, but Coach Kelly wanted to make the team his own, so the Eagles traded Shady to the Buffalo Bills in the 2015 offseason for linebacker Kiko Alonso. There was some controversy following the move, as Shady said in interviews that Chip Kelly traded away black players and didn't respect him or other stars. Buffalo appreciated McCoy and signed him to a new deal. He repaid them with 3 more seasons of very good production before injuries and age caught up to him. For the Eagles, trading their franchise running back for a linebacker who wasn't even guaranteed to start didn't quite pan out, as Alonso was a backup in his first season, missed most of the year with a knee injury, and was a throw-in piece in the Eagles trade the next season that laid the groundwork for the Carson Wentz trade-up. Oh, and Chip Kelly was fired that same offseason. Chip Kelly's next stop as head coach was in San Francisco, but he wasn't the one at fault for this trade. 49ers trade 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance. The wrongdoers of this debacle were none other than Kyle Shanahan and general manager John Lynch. After multiple deep playoff runs behind Jimmy Garoppolo, Lynch and Shanahan were looking to upgrade a QB. They made a blockbuster move that shocked the NFL world when they traded 3 first-round picks and the third to the Miami Dolphins for the #3 overall pick in the 2021 draft. They took the raw, talented, little experienced prospect from North Dakota State, Trey Lance. Once the time came for Trey Lance to compete for the starting job, he struggled. He was distracted off the field, being caught making it rain in a strip club, which makes sense as to why this guy didn't make it. You really think those activities are what the top quarterbacks do? The only way Tom Brady or Pat Mahomes makes it rain is by tearing up opposing defenses on the field. Leadership is one of the main objectives of a quarterback, and Trey Lance was none of that, but he was still named the starter to begin the 2022 season. He lost his first game against the Bears before breaking his leg in Week 2, giving the starting role back to Jimmy G and eventually Brock Purdy. Tell me, is Trey Lance a bust, or did Lynch and Shanahan fail by drafting him? San Francisco's picks became the framework for the Dolphins to acquire Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Bradley Chubb. The 49ers have had success, but if it weren't for the amazing success of Brock Purdy, Lynch and Shanahan would not be working in San Francisco. Talking about drafting poorly, this next team frustrates the living daylights out of me. The Raiders traded Khalil Mack and drafted poorly with the picks. The Raiders made the list again, and it's not often that they draft cornerstone players, especially in the first round. In 2018, Khalil Mack was the face of the defense for the Oakland Raiders. On the back of his 2016 Defensive Player of the Year season under Jack Del Rio, they made the playoffs. playoffs for the first time since 2002, and even though they lost to the Texans, there was optimism in the building that Oakland was close to competing for a Super Bowl. But after a disappointing 2017 season, highlighted by another Pro Bowl season for Mack, demanding a new contract, Mack held out of training camp all the way until the beginning of the 2018 season, when John Gruden and the Raiders traded him to a team that would pay, the Chicago Bears. The Bears made Mack the highest paid defender ever, while giving the Raiders 2 first-round picks, a third and a sixth. The Bears also received a pick that became star tight end Cole Kmet. Unfortunately for the Raiders, the Gruden era was headlined by pathetic draft choices, and none of the players acquired with those picks are on the Raiders today. This includes running back Josh Jacobs, cornerback Damon Arnett, and wide receiver Bryan Edwards. On the other side of the deal, Mack continued dominating in Chicago, making 2 more All-Pro teams, 3 more Pro Bowls, and finishing second for another Defensive Player of the Year. Who won the trade? It sucks to be a Raiders fan, but David Tepper's Panthers are putting up a catfight. The Panthers trade DJ Moore and Caleb Williams for Bryce Young. In 2023, General Manager Scott Fitterer and the Panthers pulled the trigger on a massive deal, sending 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and wide receiver DJ Moore for the first overall pick that year. The 2023 class was loaded with promising quarterback prospects, giving Carolina the choice between Anthony Richardson from Florida, C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, and Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young from Alabama. There was speculation up until draft night, but eventually the pick was turned in, and Bryce Young was the chosen one. Named the Week 1 starter, Young struggled to find his footing in the league, throwing more turnovers than touchdowns, and his stats were nothing Carolina expected. His small size, criticized in the scouting process, also proved to be an issue, as he was injured early in his rookie year. The Panthers were the worst team in football and would have had the first overall pick again, but remember, they had given it to the Bears, who selected generational prospect Caleb Williams from USC in 2024. David Tepper has to be pretty happy with himself for being a huge part of the draft process and pushing the front office into taking Bryce Young. Who's to blame? Are the Panthers just that bad, or is Bryce Young a bust? Billy O and the Texans trade DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for David Johnson. Before the Texans fleeced the Browns with Deshaun Watson, they had to be on the business end of a ripoff first. During the 2020 offseason, Bill O'Brien shipped superstar receiver DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals in exchange for running back David Johnson and a few mid-round picks. As expected, the Texans were bashed for moving the consensus top 5 receiver for such a minuscule return. Hopkins wasn't perfect in Arizona, but his first season was close, aiding the development of QB Kyler Murray while catching over 1,400 yards in 2020. Injuries began to limit D-Hop in 2021, and he was suspended for PEDs in 2022, but he was still highly productive, earning him a contract with the Titans in 2023, and then being good enough for the Chiefs to trade for him in their chase for a three-peat. Up next, the Seahawks trade a lot for Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams thrived in Gotham while playing for the Jets. He was the 6th overall pick in the 2017 draft and played 3 very good seasons for New York as their starting strong safety. Adams was top 3 in tackles in every season he played, becoming famous as a game wrecker and blitzing powerhouse. As he became eligible for an extension, it was leaked that Adams was being shopped around by the Jets, which made Adams officially request the trade. The Seahawks were the highest bidders and sent a big package for Jamal, notably sending 2 first-rounders and a third. The Jets turned the picks into offensive guard Elijah Vera Tucker and receiver Garrett Wilson. Both contributed as starters for the Jets. For Seattle, though, the trade wasn't quite as lucrative. They signed Adams to the richest deal for any safety in history at the time, following a 2020 campaign where he set a new career high in sacks. However, after a dip in production to start 2021, Adams suffered season-ending injuries in both 2021 and 2022. He was okay in 2023, but was released following the season. The Browns gave up on Baker Mayfield. Is it me, or are the Cleveland Browns competing for the worst franchise in football? A lot of this can be blamed on ownership and poor drafting, but the one time the Browns nailed a pick, they threw him out like trash and tanked their franchise again. Following an 0-16 season in 2017, the Browns had the first overall pick in the 2018 draft, and they chose Baker Mayfield, a walk-on QB who had impressed at Oklahoma and became a Heisman Trophy winner winner in 2017. After leading Cleveland to their best season since 2007, he was considered by many fans to be the franchise savior. Mayfield continued improving, and in 2020, he took the Browns to the playoffs for the first time since 2002. But he didn't stop there, throwing for 263 yards and 3 TDs in a 48-37 win over the rival Pittsburgh Steelers in the wildcard round. It was the Browns' first playoff victory since 1994, but they weren't satisfied. Mayfield was not extended before the 2021 season and played most of the season through a litany of injuries. The Browns went 8-9, but instead of continuing to build around Baker, who had become the face of the franchise and a fan favorite, they traded for Deshaun Watson, causing Mayfield to request a trade. Baker was traded to the Panthers in the 2022 offseason for a mere conditional 4th-round pick. Baker went 1-5 in Carolina before salvaging his career with the Rams and leading the Buccaneers into the post-Brady era. It doesn't end there. Another lousy deal was made in Cleveland. The Browns trade a lot for Odell Beckham Jr. When Cleveland's front office still believed in Baker Mayfield, they looked to find pieces to make their offense more explosive. Early in the 2019 offseason, they traded for All-Pro wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. from the New York Giants, sending safety Jabril Peppers, guard Kevin Zeitler, as well as 1st and 3rd round picks. The Dog Pound was excited about adding such a prestigious player to their roster. Unfortunately, a combination of injuries and bad chemistry kept the Browns from receiving the impact they hoped to gain by adding OBJ. Odell was almost himself in his first season with Cleveland, catching 74 passes for over 1,000 yards but just 4 touchdowns. He was on pace to continue dominating in 2020 but tore his ACL halfway through the year. Beckham returned in 2022 in good health but saw fewer targets in favor of Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins. Beckham's father, Odell Sr., complained on social media about his son's usage, and the Browns subsequently cut him. Odell signed with the Rams and got a ring, but tore his ACL again in the Super Bowl before rejoining the Ravens in 2023 and the Dolphins in 2024. Odell was okay for the Browns, but wasn't a part of their 2020 playoff run and wasn't great in the locker room. In contrast, Kevin Zeitler was a full-time starter in New York until he signed a massive contract with Baltimore. Jabril Peppers also started full-time as a Giant before landing with the Patriots. The Giants also got a stud with one of the Browns' picks, taking sexy Dexy Dexter Lawrence. The Browns keep losing on their trades, but this next team didn't go out without a fight. The Broncos trade the farm for Russell Wilson. Russ won a Super Bowl with a loaded roster that Pete Carroll and John Schneider built. It was so good and young that Seattle looked like the next dynasty. After losing their second Super Bowl appearance by throwing it at the goal line, the team was so disgusted with the decision that it essentially imploded. Wilson remained and looked good in Seattle, but he wanted to prove he was more than the team. After flirting with the idea for a couple of seasons, Russell Wilson quietly requested a trade from the Seattle Seahawks. After rumors about multiple destinations, he was traded to the Denver Broncos in 2022 for 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a 5th, Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant. The trade was ground-shaking, as was the 5-year, $245 million contract Wilson signed while still under contract for 2 more years before the deal would kick in. You know how this worked out. Wilson went 11-18 as the starter in Denver, completely isolating the locker room, becoming a meme on multiple occasions, and getting cut in the 2024 offseason, leaving Denver to swallow the dead cap hit of the entire contract they had signed him to far too soon. Just a bit further northwest, the Seahawks won the deal by a country mile, rebuilding their defense and bolstering their offense with Denver's draft picks. The next trade is probably why Tom Brady left New England. The Patriots trade for Mohamed Sanu. This is funny. When the Raiders' lousy leadership drama was getting rid of Davante Adams, Bill Belichick was sharing his opinion on the Pat McAfee show that he wouldn't meet their asking price if he were still in charge of an NFL team. The Raiders wanted a 2nd-round pick, but when Belichick and the Patriots were in a tough spot in early 2019, losing 1st-rounder N'Keal Harry to injury and cutting both Antonio Brown and Josh Gordon, with only 33-year-old Julian Edelman at receiver, New England traded a 2020 2nd-rounder to the Falcons for 30-year-old Mohamed Sanu. The Patriots were hoping Sanu would be a dependable veteran weapon for Tom Brady, but in his 8 games with them, Sanu only managed 26 catches for 207 yards and a single touchdown. Someone should check on Coach Belichick, because trading a 2nd-round pick on Davante Adams is a no-brainer. Speaking of the Raiders, the Cardinals made a deal with them for a quarterback. The Cardinals traded up for Josh Rosen. The Cardinals entered the 2018 NFL Draft searching for a franchise quarterback. Arizona traded up 5 spots with the Raiders, sending their first, 3rd, and 5th round picks to Oakland. The Cardinals took Josh Rosen with the 10th pick. The media viewed Rosen highly, and he was considered the most NFL-ready of all the quarterbacks in the class. Rosen famously said at his introductory press conference that 9 mistakes were made ahead of him in the draft. He went 3-10 as the Cardinals starter, throwing for about 2,300 yards, 11 TDs, and 14 picks, while also fumbling 10 times. Rosen was immediately exposed as having below-average field vision and physical traits, and the Cardinals bailed on him immediately, taking Kyler Murray in the very next draft. Rosen was traded to the Dolphins shortly after for 2nd and 5th round picks. He was the same Josh Rosen and became a journeyman quarterback on his way out of the league. And at last, but worst of all trades, is when the Browns traded their souls for Deshaun Watson. In 2021, Deshaun Watson requested a trade from the Texans, just 1 season after signing a 4-year extension with the franchise. The 2021 NFL season was headlined by Watson's holdout and, even worse, extensive sexual harassment allegations. Despite all the chaos, the Browns couldn't resist, and they traded 3 first-round picks, a 3rd, and 2 4ths for Watson. With those picks, the Texans jump-started their rebuild, and along with some additional moves, they most notably drafted defensive end Will Anderson as part of a trade-up and receiver Tank Dell. Compensation from trading the Browns' 2024 first-rounder also became the pick used to trade for Stephon Diggs from the Bills. After drafting C.J. Stroud with their own pick in 2023, the Browns' picks have been used to build an extremely promising roster around the new franchise quarterback, helping him develop into a top 7 quarterback after just 1 season. Meanwhile, in the games Watson has played for Cleveland, he's been a shell of his former self, just flat out terrible. Even worse, the Browns gave Watson a 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract. In 2024, he still wasn't looking good, and then he tore his Achilles. The Browns are stuck with him, and I cannot imagine being a Cleveland Browns fan. My condolences go out to the dog pound. That's just brutal. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, stick with the halftime show and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future videos.